That's it. So very quickly, I forgot to remember to do this just now. This is my drawing. I put a stripe of water on the top, and we just introduced some wet paint into that, just with some sort of the peachy colours. This is the sea, little angle of the sea here. I'll send a copy of the picture with it, and I just want to, I've just put in some quite heavy paint along there, and I'm just going to take a square brush, but just with water, and I just want to pull this edge down a little bit, so that we're getting that triangular slice of sea kind of coming in there. But I just want that sort of slight, see the way it's just slightly creeping into that water, so that we're getting hopefully that sense of movement without it being too heavy, and just sort of moving down. And then once that's started,
up to the picture, because I realise I don't have the picture in it, which might help people.
I'm going to get a tiny bit of like a really flick of that very dark blue, and just see if I can introduce a hint of that along the top, maybe a little bit more. The brush that I'm using here is a Chinese ink brush, which are one of my favourite kind of brushes, and you can always spend a fortune on brushes, but these are relatively cheap versions. But I love that the point that it gives you and the control that you have with it. So I'm just introducing that little bit of blue there. Hopefully that's just pulled that in that line a little bit darker. Now the big part of this picture, of course, is all this grey that's happening here. There's an awful lot of that. And I don't want to make it too heavy, but I do need to obviously get in. It's a much darker kind of colour. So I'm going to swap to my big brush, I think, in a bit, and get some of that dark in. So to begin with, I'm going to put water on. But like I was saying earlier, you can see there's quite a lot of light happening down these wet boards kind of here. So I'm not going to take the water. I'm going to kind of leave that dry paper at the moment, but just bring in my water somewhere around here. I'm hoping that some of the water that I already put on for the sky has slightly dried off at this point, so that it's not too wet, and so that we don't get too much bleed through. If we do, it doesn't really matter. I think you have to kind of very much learn to go with it and to love what you get, you know, and you have to do like, you know, your first 100 paintings before you've got an idea of how you want to do the next 100.
Or question.
Yes, go for it.
Could you have, if you weren't confident, could you have stopped at that point, used the hairdryer before applying the next layer of water to the next block of colour?
Absolutely, yeah. You could dry it off. You could leave it, come back to it. You know, you can put it hairdryer, put it in the sunshine, put it by a radiator. So the colour I'm using here is kind of like, I would say, like a petrol blue. So I'm going to start with that, and we'll see where that gets us. I'm going to start with a really huge brush and just bring some of that along the edge. That's still very pale, so I'm going to darken it down, but it's just to start sort of like getting that in to begin with. And you can see it just dips down there. I don't want to go quite up to sea. I'm just leaving that bit of sea out, but I'm just going to start by blocking that colour in. It obviously needs to get a lot darker. So let's come in with some more of that. I'm sorry. I will promise you I will wipe the table down. At least watercolours don't stain. So let's just get that darker shade in there.
Oh, I'd be scared at this point.
It is a bit terrifying, yeah, don't worry. But I mean, it's you've got to do something, otherwise you're never going to finish it, you know. So, but hopefully we're getting some of that nice watercolour paper texture is kind of helping to give us the feeling of that surface under there. I'm just going to flick some of the colour across there. I'm just leaving a tiny bit through there, because we're going to come back with that bit later. But that's just a kind of base level where we are, and then I'm going to come in. There's actually, if I start looking at this, there's quite a lot of brown kind of texture, and there's like a bit more darkness in there. So let's take this to get that to go a bit darker again. It's kind of the appeal is kind of what it does.
What colour are you using?
This is like a sort of Prussian blue, really. And again, just kind of let that flow up to that sort of waterline, kind of around there, and then we can take that, just tilt that, bring that
When
across.
you've got quite a straight line,
Mm-hmm.
you know, in a picture,
Mm-hmm.
what I would normally do is I would sort of draw a faint pencil line in
Yeah.
with a ruler. Is that
Yeah, you can
taboo?
totally do that. No, nothing is taboo. I think whatever supports you. Sometimes you can put masking tape along it as well, and you get lots of sort of. I just want to introduce a little bit brown into here and see how that works. You get like sort of. That's quite ready, isn't it? What am I trying to say? Stop out things like things you paint on that's supposed to keep the paper white, and then you can paint over them.
You can almost see green as well.
Mm,
That
I know,
colour
it's
is
got-
a mixture of...
It's got a lot of colours in it,
Yeah.
hasn't it?
So if you ever think that you've used the wrong colour,
Yeah.
not suggesting that you have, if you ever think that, instead of trying to blot it out, is it better just go with it and think, okay, it's like that now, and I'm going to use that?
Yeah, or you can lift it off a bit. If I show you, if I get some tissue, because I'm going to blend that in through there, and then I'm going to lift that off a little bit because maybe it's a bit too pink there. So I'm going to run to my coat quickly and grab some kitchen paper, which I'll have permanently with me. But you can actually get quite a nice effect with this when you sort of
lifting it.
yeah, because it's got like a slight texture to it. So you can take that back. And I'm not trying to necessarily get rid of the colour, but I'm just taking out a little bit of the water just to, I'm going to use that in across there as well, just to sort of soften that a bit. And that gives a bit of texture as well. And then I can think if I want to come back and add, I want something slightly browny. That one that I picked on was obviously more of a reddish tone, so let's try that one.
And I suppose for a beginner who's a bit nervous, you could have another bit of watercolour paper and
I was
you could
just-
test the...
Absolutely, I was just thinking what I
Colour
probably
out on
should have
there.
done is have like a sort of tester to sort of like, you know,
Nice
like
bit.
to have go and see what the colours are like before
I
I
think
get
that's more
involved in
like
the...
it.
Yeah, I think that's a bit better. So I just want to... I'm going to try and get those to blend a bit more.
Oh, so that's interesting, that dragging down motion.
Yes, because you can take that. There's still a well of that sort of blue paint at the top, and then you can take that in and down.
I could see how you could apply that to any number of picture types, couldn't you, really?
Yeah, there's, you know, so you can still move it around while the surface is kind of liquid. And then just by almost that sort of dabbing motion, you start to introduce that sense of texture.
I'm now thinking about my sand and pebbles. I was thinking,
Yes.
how the heck am I going to do that?
Sand and pebbles, indeed. So that's kind of that really. And then I think with the boardwalk, I'm looking for I want a kind of blunt, sort of short kind of brush. And the colours are not dissimilar to the landscape, but I think with these ones what you could do is to bring them across in stripes that kind of have that feeling of the boardwalk. Just picking on that one because it's darker. Just to kind of take those through there, and then, but again, I don't want to take up too many.
It's interesting that you're sometimes starting outside the tape line, so you get your stroke level before
Yes,
you
it's sort
got
of
onto it.
Like taking a running jump.
Yeah.
You know, it's easier to kind of build it up. So we've got the dog there, and I want to get some colour onto him so he's not too much of a ghost in the machine. So I'm going to start with quite a vibrant red because he's obviously got a red jacket on. And there's this very strong sort of sense of light along the edge there, which has got slightly muffed with that line of water. But anyway, that's too big. Let me go for a smaller brush. Sorry, they're over here. So, which is a shame. But, you know, this is the sort of thing where if I was really, really, these are that small, worried about it, I could go back. I would go back with it later with sort of some ink or something stronger to make it work, because I'm not a purist. I'm not trying to, you know, I think it's quite good to have to get the image to work in its own right, you know. So let's get some more. I want more colour on him there, really. That's it. Because I want him to kind of stand out a bit against the background. So this is just using a small brush just to start that. I mean, he's quite lucky. It's lovely because of being a greyhound. He's wearing a nice red jacket, which is great from sort of a colour perspective point of view, because he really stands out against the background. You know, he is different. I think he'd be harder to get in if he was just in his natural colours, as it were.
Because he'd be grey.
He'd sort of blend in. Yeah, and although I know his legs are white, they actually look quite bluey. So what I'm going to now do is come back with that brush with the blue and just take that in. And I want that to come into that coat there, because that's just going to start darkening that down.
I think the more you mess about with colours, and the more you understand how they work, isn't it?
Yeah, and
I wouldn't have thought of doing that. I would have thought, oh no, I've got to just do the legs that colour.
But he is kind of sort of blended into his background, you know, quite, and
that's given him a shape already.
Yeah, give him a bit more kind of firmness. Now I think because he's got, it's quite difficult to see his face because it's the same. But what I'm going to do is just start bringing in some more detailed line work here with the brush. But what I'm doing is I'm again working around him to make him appear stronger. So I'm not painting him, but I'm starting to bring in more texture into the gaps around him so that he stands out more. That's kind of what I'm hoping to do anyway. And the wood under here is quite light. So I'm just gonna, this is when you'd come in with your lighter brushes to bring in lighter, I mean thinner, sorry. Sometimes these words get, I don't know, just to sort of bring those lighter lines of sort of colour in, that sort of thing. And I think like here on the edge of the boardwalk, you can see it's got this sort of cutout pattern, and it needs to be right the way over here almost actually, but I'm going to slightly sort of, again, think about those shapes in the sand, you know, so then that's the line of the wood kind of coming through there, and that's going to darken that down, and then you've got the edge of a wood kind of piece there, and it's going smaller and smaller as it comes down.
Again, I think if you're an inexperienced painter, you'd be worrying about getting the perspective right and getting the lines to go, you know, perspectively.
Yes, absolutely.
Short,
but
what I mean.
It's sort of.
But actually, that's looking really good.
It just starts to indicate what's there. And it's kind of like, it's all about this way of seeing. It's very difficult to see what's there, but if you can kind of, because you're focused on, your brain is going, I need to make that look like a dog. It's got to look like a dog. And this has got to look like wood. So if you can find something to focus on that isn't either of those things, your brain can't get involved too much in the process. I'm just going to add some stronger blue into this top edge here. Has dried off a bit more now. So now you can come in with, I want, that's probably too dark a blue. Let's come back with some water and then spread that a bit and get some more bluey blue into that. Yeah, because you're trying to sort of trick your brain into not getting, you know, to give it something else to think about so that it's not getting in your way. It's not interfering with what you're trying to do, really. Well, that's how I see it anyway. You know, I sound like I've got a terrible relationship with my brain, but it's just, it's trying to give those demons, it's just combating the demons and being sort of happy with what you've got, really. And then I think this is where I'd start to bring in some more of the detail of, I want to keep that sense of shine, but it can't be as bright as it is, because at the moment it's too bright here, and the sky isn't looking luminescent enough. And I've just transferred some blue onto the sky, which doesn't help. But so I'm going to start bringing in some sort of detail here, and then I want to find another colour to kind of darken that down. I want to come a little bit darker around him, around his back again, see if I can get that light to come in.
But you saying about your blue bit that you just put in the sky, I mean, where it is, like there are buildings, so
Yes.
you know, even if it's not the exact building that's on your picture, it gives the impression that it's something.
Yes, exactly. You can usually make things work for you. And then you can just once you get some paint in, you can then go back and pull that into the background so it's not such a strong, so that you don't get a sort of outline around him. You know, you can pull that paint kind of into what you've got, and that will hopefully sort of soften that bit. So I'm seeing this colour, it's kind of like a grey, isn't it? But it has got a slight warmth to it again.
It's
So
got shine to it.
yeah, it does, doesn't it? It's sort of very...
luminous.
that is the word, it is luminous. So I'm going to try again that warm grey, so using grey and then a little bit of peach into it, just to see if that will warm it up.
The colour reminds me of a painting that my son did of a transparent bottle, you know, like a bottle. And he painted, I'm like, how did he get that to look like a proper, you know, like you can see through the bottle?
It's just actually being open to seeing what's there. That's the difficulty. So if you what you can see through the other side, you know, you have to be able to turn off the sense of reason and just open your mind to what is actually there. That's usually, and that's the trick of trying to sort of, you know, and of course reflections are, you know, fantastically, notoriously difficult because they're very changeable. They move around a lot, and you know, and they're distortions, so they look they look strange.
Watching you do that graffiti doodle, and you were trying to get like some of the circles to have that transparent kind of metallic look to them. And you started off with I think you started off with a light blue, and then you put a grey on it, and it just transformed it. I'm like, oh my gosh, she got it, she got it.
Thank you. So
It's kind of like magical, isn't it? When you're watching it, you think, oh.
So I'm just coming back in with some of that darker tone just to bring some of that in. I've probably lost a bit of the detail, but he's definitely got some shadow under his paws here, so I'm going to start trying to get that in, because that will help to make him look like he's standing and not floating in space. I guess get a bit darker again, I think I can do that darker. Just to get that little...
I was having trouble with the crab with that because it's at a funny angle. I looked up another picture and it actually showed quite a clear reflection on it, but the one on the photo there is not so clear. So, but even once I started to put something in around him, he started to look like he was a bit more there.
Yes, it's sort of, you can locate him. So I'm just getting some more darkness onto the, and because I've got the red on first, when you bring the blue shadow up into him, it doesn't take away from the redness because you're overlaying it onto the red of his jacket. So I'm going to darken it face down as well, I think, just to sort of get that a little bit more strongly in there. That's what I'm hoping anyway, and a little bit more shadow kind of under here.
Yeah, because I guess where he's on the really light bit, there would be a shadow, wouldn't there?
But then I just want to get that shape in there again, darker. And then I can bring some of these lines across. See, being me, because I'm a slightly quite cowardly painter, I would probably, you know, come back and I'll probably work further into this with pen to kind of bring in some more accurate detail, some more of the sharper details around it, because I feel more in control of it there. But I think if we look about where that little building is there, that's sort of just sitting on the horizon, whatever it is, it just sort of adds that little dimension in, and then I think we can bring in, and you can see that actually we've got the pier comes to a straight point here. So you can come and add that in as kind of a bit of landscape. And we've got this very thin bit of sea that is still kind of, so I'm going to just come back and hopefully with a blue kind of come, just so we get that sense of it moving along there. And I just want to put another bit of dark blue into the top of that sea edge, because it's such it's that thing of like, we can't get the paper any brighter than it is. So to get a sense of light, we've got to start thinking about darkening down what's happening, so that you make the things around it darker, and that's what it looks like, you know, where it looks like lightness. So if we just bring that very dark blue in there.
I've got a real thing about that dark blue.
It's incredible, isn't
It's
it?
really great,
Yeah.
isn't it? With a pencil or a pen.
When you see
Yeah.
that sort of line along the horizon, it's just so intense. And just to sort of darken that down so that starts to kind of, hopefully, a bit more reality. And I think we could put a little bit more colour into the sky. This is where it gets really terrifying, because you're thinking, oh, that looks quite nice now, but it's, you know, maybe it needs to have a slight more dark, I'm not sure.
How often do you change your water? Because
Probably
the water gets so mucky.
not nearly as often as I should, I'll be honest with you. I tend to forget. One of my favourite tips is to have 5, make 4, instead of having 1 pot of water, have 4, so that they're there with you, and you can then change them. You know, as soon as one gets too dirty, you can go into another one, and you haven't got to stop your flow. You haven't got to go and fill things up. So I want to put like a pale beigey colour over all of that whiteness there to try and get that a bit darker, because it's still looking I want it to be bright, but it's looking too bright. So I'm just sort of dulling that down a bit. I think that looks better. It still needs to come a little bit darker, I think. But you just have to sneak up on it gently, bit by bit, and take it down slowly. Think of it as like turning the volume down slowly. So we just sort of darken that down, and then I'm just using a big brush just to kind of soften all of that over, so it becomes shadow, just with water really. Because we've got this lovely sense of light that it's giving us, and hopefully that's sort of given us that, have I got paint on there? Feel of it being, the contrast is what I'm doing. And now I'm thinking I need to get the dog even a bit darker. Don't you think he needs to be a little bit darker again, so that he's more of a silhouette against, because he's quite strong against that. So let's see if we can just get a little bit more, almost like inky black kind of coming in. You can't go this dark to begin with, but then when you see, you've got to keep everything balancing together like a sort of juggling act. You've got to sort of think about where the light comes. But I think sometimes you're totally allowed to exaggerate things to get that effect that you want. So you can see him strongly against that backdrop of quite greyness. And then I'm just using water now, and I'm just going to put maybe a little bit of the red in.
It's really interesting that there's no owner, but he's carefully a dog. Like
Yes.
a dog is really contemplating some great moment, doesn't he? Or looking out along that path, thinking, right, I'm going there, but not for a doggy reason. You know what I mean?
He's an ex-racer, as you might imagine, and my friend, they saw him, and they were looking for a dog, and they've been waiting for the right dog to come along. And I'm going to put a bit more texture into here now, I think. And they were due to come around. They were coming around to see me, and they came rushing in. They went, I think I met him, and his name's Neil.
Oh.
His name is Neil. And I was like, how can a dog be called Neil? But he's Neil. And they rang up, while I was there, the greyhound people and said, look, I met this dog, with you, and you remember me, and because they've got purple hair, so, they said, oh yes, you're the person with the purple hair. And they said, yes. And they said, well, no, he is available. And it was like, they were all sort of like, literally couldn't sit down. They were getting up and saying, oh, they're going to do checks on me. And I was like, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. And Neil is now sort of the centre of their world, really. And if you've never seen a greyhound that knows more clearly that they've landed on their feet, and my friend's always sharing pictures of when they're at work, because they work remotely for Hackney Council, and all of the pictures on Zoom, you can just see a paw, and Neil will lie on their lap and stick both legs in the air, and so they'll be working with one of his feet in their face, and you know, he's an absolute character. But and when he first got him, he had to be on special insurance because he's a greyhound, and they have an insurance company think that they're snappy, so he had to be on special measures for the first 6 months to get a report of behaviour and everything, and of course he's an absolute sweetheart, so he passed, and now he's on, you know, cheap insurance because he's a nice dog, and you know, and he's an absolute sweetie, and a legend. He's got his own Instagram account, of course. So yeah, so I'm not going to do a lot more to that because I think what I would do now, what I'm going to do now is let it sit for a bit, let it dry off, and then I might come back and do some more detail with drier paint on the kind of boardwalk and everything to kind of, and this is when I'd probably come back sneakily with some white ink, and I don't know why I say it's sneaky like it's illegal to do this, but I'm going to probably come back with some white ink and just add some really bold highlights. So I'm just going to take his muzzle down a fraction, a little flick of paint like that, and then I'm going to come back and just add a couple of extra white lights, and then I probably would sit and pick out some of the detail on the boardwalk as it's closer to kind of get it into perspective. But there we go. So that's kind of where I'd stop. Embroidering.